Good morning. Welcome to the nation's capital. My name is Bob Fu, a founder and president of China Aid. And this is my co-host, Anna Wang, the founder and executive director of Shining Light Media. It's an honor to welcome every one of you to come to this symposium. Almost exactly 10 years ago, at this time, a nationwide crackdown against human rights lawyers, legal defenders, and human rights activists were orchestrated directly by the central government of the Chinese Communist Party. All of a sudden, from midnight kidnapping to arbitrary arrest, according to well-documented facts, over 400 human rights lawyers, human rights activists, legal activists were rounded up, arrested, arbitrarily detained. And many of them are also faith-based church leaders and other faith leaders. So President Xi Jinping basically launched a war against both the rule of law and perhaps rule by the law, because before that, scholars even discuss the difference between these two. No more. It's totally ruled by the tyrant dictators. At the same time, he launched the war against the faith, started from a war against the cross with the ordered demolition and forced destruction of thousands of crosses from Zhejiang province first, then extended to other nations. Of course, the war against religious faith, not only just for the faith of Protestants, Christians, Catholics, but other decent faiths, including Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong practitioners. Of course, we all know, under the same banner of syncretization, the crackdown extended to millions of Uyghur Muslims in the East Turkestan region. So what does that imply after 10 years? Is there any hope at all to continue our cause to advance both the rule of law and religious freedom in China? So Anna and I, we are honored again to welcome you and to host this symposium. This morning, we have two very distinguished panels to discuss all these aspects on the rule of law and religious freedom. So Anna will host the first panel, and I will host the second panel. One of the first so-called July 709 crackdown victims was a founder of a law firm called Beijing Rifeng Law Firm. The founder of that law firm, attorney Zhou Shifeng, was later sentenced to 7 years imprisonment and experiencing tremendous torture like many others. So we're going to show pre-recorded video remarks from him. And after that, we will welcome the wife of one of the China's bravest or boldest human rights lawyers, Bao Zhuoxuan. So we're honored to have his wife, Ms. Geng He, here today after Zhou Shifeng's video remarks. As we all know, by August of this year, actually next month, will mark the 8th year of enforced disappearance of lawyer Bao Zhuoxuan, who was twice nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, who was perhaps the most tortured human rights lawyers in China, and yet the world, and including the family, still do not know where he is today and whether he's still alive or not. So let's welcome Zhou Shifeng for his remarks, and then we will invite Ms. Geng He to come. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
大家好，感谢各位参加709事件10周年纪念大会。我叫周世峰，是709大抓捕中被重点迫害的人权律师。709事件是历史上首次以国家的名义，打着法律的旗号，对维权律师和公民社会进行系统性清洗的政治迫害。它不是司法行为，而是一场以宋军为首的政治团伙操控的犯罪行径，是对人类良知、正义与法治的公然践踏。2015年7月10号，他们抓我的时候，没有出示任何证件，没有说任何理由，没有穿制服，在长达数个月的黑监狱里，他们对我辱骂、刑讯逼供，假冒别的警察办案，伪造讯问笔录，将核心证据改成相反的内容，作为给我定罪的法律证据。法院对我的判决也是极其荒谬的。案卷刚移送到法院，主审法官凌空就窜到看守所，要我认清形势，认罪伏法。到了法庭上，他们故意不写我对核心证据的指证意见，公然剥夺我的最后惩处权。为了剥夺我的上诉权，居然给我特制了一份送达回证。在这份送达回证上，居然没有法定的询问我是否上诉的栏目。刑满释放后，我多方控告，长期控告。我到天津市第2中级法院递交材料，他们拒绝接收。我到档案室查阅我的案件卷宗，没有我的案件信息。我向中央各职能部门的控告和申诉，均没有得到有效回复。我揭露宋军政治团伙制造709政治迫害案件，他们就永久封禁我的微信号，对我跟踪监视。709事件没有结束，宋军团伙仍然非常猖獗。我呼吁推翻709所有判决，追究制造709案的所有人的法律责任，成立国际独立调查机构彻查709。709是人类永远无法治愈的巨大伤疤，但是它吓不倒我们，我们将勇敢地奋然前行。谢谢大家。
大家好。
Hello, everyone.
非常感谢主办单位举办的这次讨论会，关注中共当局对公民维权及信仰自由的迫害。 我也特别感谢在座的各位长期关注我的先生高志胜，谢谢。
First, I would like to thank the organizers for hosting this symposium and for bringing attention to the Chinese authorities' repression and persecution of civil rights and religious freedom. I especially want to thank everyone here for your long-standing concern and support for my husband, Chinese human rights lawyer Gao Zhishen.
我先生高志胜，他是一名律师，也是一名虔诚的基督徒。他运用自己的法律知识，为受迫害的当事人代理案子，向信仰团体、基督徒、法轮功，还有强制拆迁的许多案子，却屡屡遭到北京市律师协会、司法局的恐吓打压。但他依然恪守自己的职业道德及内心的良知，依然尽最大努力为当事人服务。
My husband Gao Zhishen is a lawyer and a devout Christian. He used his legal expertise to provide legal assistance to persecuted groups, including Christian church members, Falun Gong practitioners, and vulnerable citizens subjected to forced evictions. Despite repeated warnings and obstruction from the Beijing Authority, Beijing Lawyers Association, and judicial authorities, he remained true to his professional ethics and inner conscience, doing all he could to defend the innocent.
事实上，他不仅没有违反中国的任何法律，反而他是揭露了中共当局在21世纪的今天严重实施侵犯人权的案例，比如像法外关押呀、秘密关押、酷刑等。他把这种案例呢写成了调查报告，呈现给国家领导人时，然后中共当局吊销了他的律师执照，并关闭了他的北京市圣智律师事务所。
In fact, he violated no laws of China. On the contrary, what he exposed were the grave human rights violations still carried out by the Chinese communist regime in the 21st century, such as extrajudicial detention and torture. Out of conscience, as a citizen and as a lawyer, he wrote investigation reports on these abuses and submitted them to national leaders. As a result, in 2005, the authorities revoked his law license and shut down his law firm in Beijing.
在2006年8月，中共高升被以煽动颠覆国家安全罪判3年缓刑5年。在缓刑5年期间，屡遭到秘密的绑架失踪。像黑夜黑头套揭露的他这一次的酷刑呢，是他这一次的是2个月的秘密关押，还有一次是最长是20个月的秘密关押。20个月秘密关押完了以后呢，就把他投入到了新疆沙雅监狱服刑3年。
In August 2006, Gao Zhishen was sentenced to 3 years in prison with 5-year probation for inciting subversion of state power. But during the probation period, he was repeatedly abducted by the Chinese communist authorities, tortured, and held in solitary confinement. After the probation ended, he was once again imprisoned at Shaya prison in Xinjiang at the end of 2011, where he was held in solitary confinement for 3 years, suffering severe physical and mental abuse. And I would like to add, the longest that he was held captive was 20 months.
Yeah, 在新疆沙雅监狱是小号关了3年。3年出狱的时候呢，身心跟身体遭受到了巨大的摧残，几乎是抬着回家的啊。
He suffered very severe physical and mental abuse. By the time that he was carried back home, he had to be physically carried.
我跟我们家人说，他回来的时候，我给我拍张照片。我们家一直没有给我拍照片，我过了有10来天，问我们家为什么不拍照片的时候，我们家说回来的时候，我们家都已经把他的那个寿衣都准备好了，说他现在都一天比一天好了，应该就劝我要知足，是这样。
I have asked my family members to take a photo of him so that I can be I can be arrested. But they said I should just be grateful that he's alive.
从2014年8月高升刑满释放了以后呢，就软禁在陕北的小三村。但是呢，在2017年的8月14号，再次被中共秘密绑架，到今天，也就是下个月就整整8年了。这8年来，我们杳无音信。
Ever since 2017, he was abducted again, and ever since then, we had no information, no contact from him. He was disappeared.
中共当局没有给我们不管是口头或者书面依据化，也没有任何的法律文书，这样他们也不承担任何的责任，也没有任何痕迹表明我先生是否还活着，他就这样在这世界上被消失了。
Over these 8 years, we have received no word, written or verbal, from the Chinese authorities or public security departments, no legal documents, no official notice, no one held accountable. There is not even a sign to indicate whether he is alive or dead. He has simply been disappeared from this world.
这近8年来，我们聘请了律师，还有向当地各级公安去询问、打探他在哪里，得到的就是不知道，或者就说我们说高升的案子呢，都是由北京负责，那我们去问一下北京，然后又是不知道，就是这样踢皮球周而复始的。
We have never stopped trying to find him. Our family has repeatedly hired lawyers to make inquiries to various levels of public security. But all we ever hear is either the cold reply, "We don't know," or the dismissive response, "We'll ask Beijing." When we ask Beijing, they also reply to us that they don't know anything about it.
对我来说，这8年每一天天都是在噩梦中，每天我一睁眼，我就想他是不是还活着。我每当吃一顿饭时，我都想他是不是也能吃上饭。每当孩子有一丝的进步，想跟他分享的时候，都是在想爸爸在哪里。
For me personally, these 8 years have been a nightmare from which I never woken up. Every day I ask myself, is he still alive? Every meal, I can't help but wonder, is he eating right now? Each time our child grows or reaches a new milestone, I want to tell their father, but where is him?
我在这里恳请美国政府长期关注中国人权的国会议员、人权机构以及整个自由世界的人们，请你们不要沉默。我们不应该允许让曾经一位为中国法治建设的律师、挺身而出的律师，就这样被黑暗中消失。我们需要给他讨回一个公道，他是死还是活？
I solemnly plead with the U.S. government, with members of Congress who have long been concerned about human rights in China, with human rights organizations, and with the entire free world, please do not keep silence. We cannot allow a lawyer who once stood up for the rule of law in China to simply die in darkness or disappear into silence. At the very least, I need one answer. Is he alive or dead?
这不仅对我个人家庭是巨大的摧残，更是对人权公然的挑衅。我再次也请过美国政府，我们是不是应该采取更具体的一些行动？是不是能让美国驻华的使馆人权官员，去见一下高升的家人？我们只有一个小小的请求，让高升给我们打个电话，如果他还活着。
This is not only a devastating trauma for me and my family, it is a direct confrontation to the value of human rights. I call on the U.S. government and everyone here. Can we take one more concrete step? For example, could human rights officers in the U.S. Embassy in China find a way to visit Gao Zhishen's family members in China? Our only humble request is this: if he is still alive, please let us hear his voice, just one phone call.
我一直想我在这里再次感谢2006年众议院 通过了一项法案，是421票对0票，的一项法案，是365号决议。决议就是呢，督促中共政府呢停止骚扰高志胜，并恢复高志胜的圣职律师事务所。但是到现在已经19年过去了，这项决议成了一纸空文。我期待着能把这个决议呢继续的落实吧。
I want to thank the U.S. Congress for passing a resolution in 2006, 421 votes to nil, supporting my husband Gao Zhishen, pleading for his release and the revoke of his law license and his office. But it's been 19 years since then. We hope that this action can be actually taken from this resolution.
请不要让高志胜一直处在生死不明、彻底被消失的状态，不要让他的声音永远埋没，不要让黑暗永远遮住他的名字高志胜。谢谢大家。
Please do not let Gao Zhishen remain in the state of disappearance, his life or death unknown. Please do not let his voice be buried forever. Please do not let darkness forever obscure his name, Gao Zhishen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Geng He. No one can sit still after hearing that plea. Before, maybe I should invite our first distinguished panelist to come up to be seated, Ambassador Nathan Seals, Professor Terry Halliday, and Mr. Chen Guangcheng, and Attorney Piero Tosi, and Ms. Sophie Loa. Please come up. So Anna will moderate the first panel. So our format is each of the distinguished panelists are invited to speak for 3 minutes for opening statement on this issue, and then we'll have a round of question to the panelists, and then the last portion is Q&A. So be prepared. Anna.
Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. This is Shining Light Media, Anna Wang. So big honor to be here as a moderator. This is panel 1, the 709 Crackdown and China's rule of law. May I have an honor to invite our first speech, Ambassador Nathan Seals, please.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Bob, and the organizers for inviting me to be here with you today. Today's first panel, the name of this panel is 709 Crackdown and China's Rule of Law, but I think we should simply rename the panel to 709 Crackdown, because there is no rule of law in China. Under the Chinese Communist Party, there is no rule of law, and that is not an accident, that is by design. And to understand why that is so, it might be helpful to contrast the Chinese Communist Party's approach to the rule of law, such as it is, with the models with which we are more familiar here in the United States and in the West. In the United States, power comes from the bottom up. The individual is sovereign, the rights-bearing individual, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, to borrow a phrase from Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, can choose what power is given to government and what power is withheld. Certain powers are given to local government and state governments, certain powers are given to the federal government, and the Constitution ultimately constrains power as much as it creates power. In Beijing, under the Chinese Communist Party, we see an inversion of this approach. The party is sovereign, not the people. The party is sovereign. The party creates the state creates the laws operate on the people. And so it is meaningless under the Chinese Communist Party's regime to speak of law as a constraint on government. And it is even more meaningless to speak of the law as a constraint on the party. The law is a creation of the party. It is designed to promote the party's interests, not to constrain the party. And so when we talk about rule of law, we have to understand that this is a fundamentally challenging proposition for the authorities in Beijing. It serves to delegitimize the authorities and the regime they have created, and that is precisely why lawyers are such a threat to the powers that be in Beijing, because they and the law that they represent proves that the rule of law under the Chinese Communist Party is a lie. I'll wrap up shortly, but I want to leave you with one quick observation about what we should do about this. There is an important lesson here for Westerners and global organizations that seek to do business in China or that seek access to China. If you are a Western business that wants to do business in China and you have to hire a lawyer in China, that lawyer is not on your side. That lawyer works for the Chinese Communist Party. That lawyer, that law firm must implement principles of Xi Jinping thought. That lawyer, that law firm must advance the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, even especially when those interests diverge from your interests as a client. Those lawyers, those law firms must create cells within their organizations for the Chinese Communist Party to oversee management decisions, hiring decisions, and strategic decisions for that firm. Your lawyer is not working for you. Are you prepared to enter the market knowing that that is the price you must pay? And for global religious organizations, the same risk is present. Are you prepared to allow the Chinese Communist Party to have a say in the appointments of leaders in your religious organization? Are you prepared to allow the Chinese Communist Party to shape doctrine of your religious organizations? Is that a price you're prepared to pay for access to China under the Chinese Communist Party? Or is the safer course and the more faithful course to stay underground, maintain fidelity to 2,000-year-old principles or even older principles, and maintain organizational control? Thank you very much, and I look forward to Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Great speech. Next speaker is Mr. Halliday, Professor, Research Professor Emeritus, American Bar Foundation. Please.
Thank you. It is an honor to be able to be with you at this most important event. For 20 years, I've conducted research on lawyers and their drive for the rule of law in China. And for 50 years, I've studied how some of the noblest struggles by lawyers for basic legal freedoms have taken place in Northeast Asia, in South Korea, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and of course on the grander scale on the Chinese mainland. From these contexts, it's clear that China's government crackdown on hundreds of lawyers in 709 is a landmark in China's history. But more than that, it's also a landmark in the world. Nowhere, anywhere, has the world in the last half-century seen such a massive, coordinated, brutal, and sudden nationwide assault on China's boldest and bravest criminal defense and rights lawyers. Did the 709 crackdown succeed? 10 years later, a superficial answer would say yes. Has the party really destroyed all hope? My research in the last 2 years says emphatically no. A remnant remains. Its most articulate and courageous leaders know they are largely silenced, but their will remains unbroken. Great changes often occur with a very small vanguard, such as these, a spearhead. These rights lawyers insist that hope remains. I am cautiously optimistic, says one. The next 20 to 30 years are extremely critical. We can reach a consensus among leading visionary lawyer intellectuals and practitioners. Another rights lawyer says, transformation is unstoppable. In the short term, I'm relatively pessimistic, but in the medium to long term, I am optimistic, even highly optimistic. And for all these, freedom of religion will be essential in the new China, as it has been in the transformations in Taiwan and South Korea to rule of law societies and was to the struggles in Hong Kong since 1997. Religious freedom is intertwined with freedom of speech and freedom of association. And we know these are essential elements of an open civil society. Many of China's rights lawyers believe freedom of religion will inject vitality of belief and commitment into China's society. China's Christian rights lawyers believe their faith can inject values of love, equality, justice, forgiveness into the body politic of a new China. Churches can become small-scale sites of democracy in their own organizations. Religious bodies of all faiths can express love for the stranger, for the vulnerable, like orphans and women and the poor in voluntary caring communities. Until then, I applaud the organizers of today's event for keeping alive in the global public square the historic struggle in China. The 709 lawyers, the rising generations of new recruits, the silent judges and law professors across China will be energized and empowered by the knowledge that publics and governments outside China stand with them. Their hope will remain alive. Their ultimate struggle will finally prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Halliday. Next speaker is Mr. Chen Guangcheng, very famous barefoot doctor. It's a distinguished fellow, Center of Human Rights, Catholic University of America. Guangcheng, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. 10 years ago, the 709 crackdown began, and the CCP openly declared war on the rule of law, republicanism, and the balance of power. Preparation had begun under Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. When Xi Jinping took power, the prosecution was codified into law. In particular, in Article 73 of the Criminal Procedural Law. Article 73 allows for the use of black jails and arbitrary detention as, quote, specific surveillance residencies, end quote. This evil law also states that family and lawyers can be denied information regarding those who are detained for up to 6 months, with extensions allows indefinitely. The case of human rights attorney Bao Zhuoxuan is among the most egregious example of this law. Bao Zhuoxuan suffered decades of prosecution, including unimaginable torture. In August 2017, he was abducted, it has now been nearly 80 years since his family has had any information about him. No one knows if he is alive or died. According to the logic of the CCP's evil law, the extension of silence regarding Bao Zhuoxuan's disappearance has been applied over 15 times. An evil law is an illegal law, as is the case of all the 709 victims. Bao Zhuoxuan's case is an instance of illegal abduction. But talking about the rule of law in an authoritarian system is like talking about traffic regulations in the wilderness. Talking about the balance of power with a dictator only increases his thirst for control. The CCP knows what constitutional government and the rule of law are. They also know a Western-style system would mean the end of power and privilege for them. So they will never accept it. This is why the free world must solve the issue of the CCP's militarization and monopoly of domestic lethal power, and must act to eliminate communist authoritarianism. We have to. And let's work together. Throw the enemy of humanity, the CCP, into the ash pit of history. We have to do that. Join hands to do that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Guangcheng. Next speaker is Attorney Piero Todge, Staff Director of CECC. Here we appreciate for CECC and Mr. Piero support and the proportion Chinese.
Well, thank you. The 709 crackdown asks the core question, is a rule of law-based society possible so long as the Chinese Communist Party controls China? Mao Zedong once compared himself to a monk with an umbrella. Edgar Snow, the great propagandist for the Chinese Communist Party, touted that as showing his humility. But what did he mean when he compared himself to a monk with an umbrella? Well, a monk is bald. A monk has no hair, wu fa in Chinese. If you have an umbrella, you can't see the sky, wu tian. Wu fa, wu tian. That's a homonym for no law, no heaven, lawlessness. After Mao passed, we entered the so-called reform era, and the question of whether a rule of law-based society was possible was raised. I think Tiananmen Square, however, Tiananmen answered that question. The party is supreme. Yet after that, we in the West, in the United States, we bought into what was called the China fantasy. Chris Smith, who was the chair and is the current co-chair of the Congressional Executive Commission in China, in May of 1994, when Bill Clinton delinked trade and human rights, had a press conference, and he said that, if a society that does not respect human rights, that does not respect rule of law, they will not respect intellectual property. They will not respect the transactions that are entered into. Yet we began a period of engagement by which we subsidized the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. With the rise of Xi Jinping, it's a very important document that people, I'm sure here, many here are familiar with, document number 9, a communique on certain developments in the ideological sphere. It said quite clearly that rule of law is a Western-imposed concept alien to the Chinese tradition. This document was coterminous with the rise of Xi Jinping. The 709 crackdown and the crackdown of heroes like Bao Zhuoxuan, that is the true legacy of Xi Jinping. People at the time, though, greeted the rise of Xi. They thought he was a reformer, and if you read Western articles at the time, they spoke about how he was someone who advocated rule of law. He was involved in anti-corruption efforts. Bo Xilai was very famously prosecuted for his corruption, and he was corrupt. But you know what? The entire system is corrupt, and so is Xi Jinping. Where did he hide his wealth? Well, with his sister and his brother-in-law. Anti-corruption is not a tool of rule of law. It is a tool to suppress one's political rivals. We have to be very clear about that. Bob spoke about the concept of rule of law, 法治. That can also be translated of rule by law. And there is that document number 9, that rule of law is an imposition from the West, and that the Chinese tradition is alien to the Chinese tradition. That's partially true. You have this tradition of Chinese legalism, 法家, with this ancient philosophy that essentially saw law as a tool of the emperor, a tool of repression. That is how the Chinese Communist Party interprets it. Yet there is also an alternative tradition. Generally, in the Confucian tradition, there is this concept of heaven, or of the Tao, Tian, Tao, the idea of a law above the law. Tyrants disregard that law. It was very interesting. You have had a number of reformers in China within the Communist Party, Hu Yaobang, Zhao Ziyang, maybe even Li Keqiang. Let's not extol them. They were still members of the Communist Party. Let's not make too much of it. Li Keqiang, in the very last speech he gave as premier in China, said something. He said, 人在干,天在看, or as people in Taiwan like to say, 人在做,天在看. In other words, men act and heaven watches. That was an appeal to a law above the law, but look what happened to Li Keqiang, what happened to Hu Yaobang, Zhao Ziyang, what happened to those reformers. So long as the party prevails, it will maintain total control. So in answer to that question that I asked at the beginning, is a rule of law-based society possible so long as the CCP controls China? The answer, I'm afraid, is no. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is my panel last speech. This is it's a special for me. It's Mr. Ding Jiaxi's wife, Sophie Luo. Here, I really want to tell everybody, Ding Jiaxi is very, very excellent and very brave. It's a human lawyer. He is also my close friend. When he in Beijing, for avoid the police monitor, we are short time in my home. So the 10 years ago, it's still vivid for me. This is a story. So here right now, Mr. Ding Jiaxi's wife, Shen Chun, please.
I think it's a good idea to stand up to talk. Can you hear? Before this meeting, I'm quite emotional, I have to say. Every memory meeting, I always feel difficult, but I still think it's important to memorize. For me, as a wife of a political prisoner, with my husband still in the jail, the first thought I want to tell everyone that, as Mr. Sales said, we discuss here about law and rule of law of China, but 709 crackdown and December 26 crackdown is showing to the world that China has no law and no rule of law at all. When I step in, Mr. Zhou Shifeng is talking about the torture. They take him away without any notice. Secret detention, secret trial, secret verdict. This happened on 709 and on my husband and Xu Ziyong's case, exactly the same. In the past 12 years, I have been fighting for my husband and all the political prisoners, but I saw the situation in China is getting worse and worse since Xi Jinping going on the power. Until today, the situation is still getting worse. The Chinese human rights lawyer is not allowed to have any voice anymore. Try to imagine a country without a lawyer. How can it talking about law and the rule of law? So I want to tell the world in China, don't believe what they said about law and the rule of law. They have only violence and lie. They lie to the world, they lie to people in China, they lie to international community. Secondly, I want to raise the attention to everyone. After 10 years, the 709 family in China still under close surveillance. Their family members was put on the travel ban, not allowed to go in abroad. Their kids are still not allowed to go into school as the other kids. This is completely insane. Mr. Gao Zhisheng disappeared for 8 years. Still have no one can explain where he is. This is not acceptable as a family member, not acceptable as a human rights defender. Yes, the situation is so terrible, but what are we going to do? Are we going to cry in every day? No, I want to tell the world. We are, according to this all these years, the dictator just really want us to be discouraged. But 709 sisters taught me, we have to be happy every day, facing all these difficulties, to be joyful, to be thankful, and to take action. Thank you.
Sophie is really hearing. She and her husband, they are truly hearing couple. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day. 10 years ago, this moment, Chinese human rights lawyer Lady Wang Yu was arrested, igniting the 709 crackdown that shocked the world. Following a few days, more than 300 lawyers, activists, church workers were detained across China. Many live suffered severe torture and a heavy sentence. Today, our commemoration honors their courage and suffering, and remains the word that in China, citizens are stripped of basic rights, dignity, and freedom of speech. And Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is a brutal, lawless, gang-style regime that poses a real threat to the international order and human rights and the human civilization. As a friend to many 709 hearings, I witnessed their arrest and the torment was profound anguish. It is therefore a great honor for Shining Light Media, LSA, together with China A, to host this memorial here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., a beacon of freedom. First, I extend heartfelt thanks to American government and to all of you who have consistently supported Chinese democracy movement and the dissidents. Second, I urge the United States and the international community to recognize the CCP's true nature and its assault on the global liberal order. Stand with the Chinese people, back their struggle for freedom, democracy, rule of law, and human dignity. To the 709 hearings and all press for democracy people, stay stronger. The future belongs to you. Your courage has already etched to your names in history and will illuminate China's tomorrow. We are living on the annals of freedom forever. Thank you. And today, right now, I think this is a discuss time. I have two questions to ask my friend. How can the US government better assist Chinese democracy advocates? And how can advance the rule of law and democracy in China? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take the first crack at that, but also eager to hear the views of my panelists, fellow panelists. I don't pretend to have a playbook that will magically bring democracy and rule of law to the people of China who deserve it. And let's be clear. The people of China are the first victims of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm inspired by the stories that I've heard today from activists and their family members who are working so hard to bring a brighter future to the Chinese people. The idea that democracy, the idea that liberty, the idea that rule of law are foreign to China, it's a lie. It's a lie that Xi Jinping and his minions tell in order to justify their power, to justify their hold on power at the expense of the Chinese people. Look at Hong Kong. Look at Taiwan. These thriving world cities, economically vibrant, culturally vibrant, full of life and energy. That is the future of China. And the people, the lawyers we are hearing from today, are helping chart a path towards that brighter future. What can the US government do? Just first of all, talk about it. Raise the visibility of the issue. Every time a US diplomat talks to a Chinese government official, talk about human rights, talk about democracy, talk about rule of law, talk about protections for Chinese people. Talk about the victims we've heard about today. Name names. When Ronald Reagan would name names of the victims of Soviet communism who were languishing in gulags, they found out, right? The rat lines, the networks, the communications networks got the message into the gulags. That sustained morale. We have to take a page from that playbook. We also have to sanction the bad actors in China. Chinese Communist Party officials, business leaders who profit from the CCP's tyrannical hold on power. You have to choose. Either you can maintain access to the US market and do business here, or you can be a stooge for Xi Jinping. You can't do both. Thank you.
We are asked what the US government can do, and I suggest three things. I'm an empirical social scientist, and I have been relying on support from the National Science Foundation as well as the American Bao Foundation, for my research in China over the last 20 years. We must know what's going on inside China, and we must know it systematically. We need to know what are the pressure points, what are the terrible harms being experienced by the population as a whole. Where is there potential leadership for fighting against Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party? Who are allies who can join together in civil society as well as with the legal profession? What is their vision of a new China? All of that requires research. And so I urge the US government to substantially fund China research through the National Science Foundation. My second comment is that the world spotlight needs to be maintained on China and its human rights abuses. And here I think one of the great elements of the US government has been the Congressional Executive Commission on China, the CECC, represented here today. This is an extraordinary body, unprecedented, I think, across the world's governments, where both the executive and the legislative branches of government come together in a bipartisan way to systematically shed the spotlight on every aspect of law and rights in China, and they do so on an annual basis in their reports. And I would hope that this institution can be strengthened inside the United States government and will spread to other governments. And finally, the word must continue to beam inside China, public understandings of how the free world thinks and what it takes to be a rule of law society and how democracy works must be heard by those audiences inside China that want to hear it. And so I urge the US government to provide whatever funding can be made available to be sure that radio and other forms of media break through the Great Firewall, because we can be sure that there are hundreds of millions of Chinese wanting to hear those words.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Professor Halliday, for those kind words. If you could talk to the appropriators, that'd be great. But no, thank you. In answer to the question, I think it's stop subsidizing tyranny. We really do need to enforce our laws. We have good laws on the books, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which I think has been the most effective tool this century. We should not allow goods that have utilized forced labor anywhere in the supply chain from entering this country. I think that there are tools that we have yet to fully utilize. So, for example, companies that do business in China, if they're publicly traded, they have to issue annual reports and statements. They're governed by the Securities Exchange Act. The 1934 Securities Exchange Act, Rule 10b-5, says that there should be no material misrepresentations or omissions that would lead these representations to be materially false. Every company that has does business in China that fails to disclose, for example, forced labor in its supply chain, or also doing business with PLA entities, and that has ESG policies that they tout, is really making a false statement. So I think one effective way, the way to change corporate behavior is through the compliance departments. If the SEC were to take action, even just issue a letter, I think the rest would follow. Corporations would have to take into account the regulatory powers of the United States, but also the plaintiff's bar, because there's a reputational cost to doing business in China. And the sooner that corporations understand that, and the U.S. government takes action with regards to that, you're going to see, I think, a natural movement away from that and an end to the subsidization of tyranny. And also, we have to stop making a virtue out of stability. That translates, into the Communist Party remaining in power. After Tiananmen, George H.W. Bush infamously sent Brent Scowcroft to China to reassure them that, don't worry, we value stability. It's not that something we can impose from the outside, but we have to let the Chinese people have their voice, and we should not make a virtue out of stability. Right now, if you look at what's happening in China, tremendous citizen movements that don't get the attention right there. Xi Jinping's hold on power is very brittle, so I think we should let nature take its course. Stop subsidizing tyranny. Stop making a virtue of stability, which means the continued rule of the Communist Party. Thank you.
While we are talking about what American government and the international society can do for us, I would like to highlight one point. We also, as Chinese, as Uyghur, as all the Tibetans, we also think what we can do for the change to bring the rule of law. I think we are in the freedom world. I always thinking about what else overseas Chinese can do for the change of China. Today I hesitated. I asked, do we speak in Chinese or in English? In the end, I decided to speak English. Even my English is not that good yet, but we need to let outside world know a true China. I saw many Uyghurs, Tibetans did much better than mainland China people. We need to tell our friends, if you have time, go to learn English, learn political science, learn human rights courses in the United States in all the possible channels you can get. That's why I founded the organization. Just focus on civic education, engagement, civic connection. So that's my point. Thank you.
各位嘉宾、各位朋友，现在是 Panel One 最后的问答时间。
Honored guest.
我们今天特别推荐一个
Now is the
我们的重要的客人
last section.
709的女英雄王怡和包龙军先生的儿子包萌萌，他亲历会场。我们想请包萌萌谈谈709对他的影响。萌萌，有请。
包萌萌 ，Let's invite him to give us a speech.
It's okay. I mean, yeah, okay. Come on. Okay. Hello, everybody. If time permits, I would like to introduce myself firstly. My name is Bao Zhuoxuan, also known as Bao Mengmeng. And my mother is human rights lawyer Wang Yu. My father is human rights lawyer Bao Longjun. And I am one of the witnesses and victims of 709 Crackdown. And on July 9th, 10 years ago, I had just passed 15 years old. So that day, the Chinese community, the CCP launched a historic crackdown towards human rights lawyer in China. And my parents were arbitrarily detained, and me, at that time, holding a valid passport and a visa to plan to study abroad. But at that time, I was stopped by the police at the airport. They pushed me and my father to the ground. They separated us and placed me under house arrest for several days. After that, I was forcibly separated from my parents and sent to live with my grandparents in Inner Mongolia. I longed to regain my freedom, so I became part of the plan organized by my parents' friends to help me to escape from China to United States. But unfortunately, the plan failed in Myanmar. We were arrested in a cross-border operation by Chinese authorities. I was only 15 years old at the time I was detained. They placed me under a dark room near the border where police beat me with a stake to force me to sign on a statement. Even though they later claimed they would release me after I was let out of detention, I remained under strict surveillance by the police. It was practically house arrest. I needed police escort even if I was just going to buy a pen. And they made it to the media, so I cannot study in Inner Mongolia anymore. I lived every day under the fear of monitor. And that fear, that confusion, and that helplessness continue to haunt me until that day. And it led me to a psychological trauma from now on. In reality, human rights lawyers are meant to speak for the justice and the vulnerable people in China. Yet in China, they are labeled as criminal and subvert state power. During the 709 crackdown, the hundreds of human rights lawyers and human rights defenders were persecuted by the Chinese government. In China, even children are not spared. Some officials have openly said children are a soft spot and disadvantage of the human rights defenders. Now on, I can stand here in the United States to share my story. I had to flee my homeland to seek asylum in America because I witnessed how the state used violence to suppress the truth. And today, I feel like I bear the responsibility to share my story to more and more people, to the world. A 709 crackdown is not just a history. Even now, many human rights lawyers remain in prison, disappear, and fear to be prison anywhere. So I now stand in the United States. I still cannot reunite with my parents. They were still in China, facing travel restriction and continuing suppression. And there was countless lawyers and people whose freedom remains stripped today. They lost their liberty to defending the rule of law. Their families and their voices are silenced, yet their existence is the most profound call for justice. I sincerely urge everybody, please don't forget those names: Xu Zhiyong, Lu Siwei, Ding Jiaxi, Li Yuhan, Li Guobei, and of course, more and more human rights defenders, and of course, my parents, Wang Yu and Bao Longjun. They are still got under surveillance of Chinese government in China, and all of them and all of their freedom cannot regain anymore. So I feel like everybody should keep their eyes on them, and I urge everyone here, and I urge the United States government to help them to keep your eyes on them, and use your voices and actions to tell the world doing human rights lawyer with conscience is not a crime, and justice cannot be imprisoned. Thank you.
我简单结译一下，包萌萌是709的这个受害者，那么他是著名人权律师包荣军跟王宇的儿子。那么当时他们709以后15年要逃到海外，只能逃亡，结果在缅甸的时候呢，就是被逮了。那个时候回去的时候呢，就是被关小黑屋，被棍子打，后来没有的读书什么，最后呢逃亡到这边。那么现在国家呢，他通过这个他亲身的经历告诉我们现在中国的实际情况，也在此呼吁大家和敦促美国各界的人士关注中国的人权，关注中国的人权律师的案件。
Thank you. I was under huge pressure to say those things here because both of my parents were threatened by the Chinese government police, even until right now. So
就是目前我的父母仍然是活在恐惧当中，在被威胁当中生存。
Thank you, guys.
实际上，我们每一个人都有
Actually, every one of
非
us
常沉重的感觉。我们生活在一个
we feel the
专制的
burden
集权国家，
because we're under the
中国
tyranny.
人都是一种伤害。
For every single Chinese is a hurt.
我们今天的这个问答时间呢，现在还有，请在
This is a
座的各位
section of Q&A.
需要跟我们的嘉宾沟通，
If you have anything want to
哪些需要提一
communicate
些
with our
问
guests,
题，有请举手。
please raise your hand and ask.
倪金芳先生。
709案件其实是习近平亲自指挥、亲自部署的。我看到一份文件，在2015年2月16号，习近平就签发了一份，就是以分类历史事务所和以访民葛觉平为首的，就是那两个。接下来就在2015年7月9号，分类历史湖以王玉这一个被抓，就开始了那个709事件。苏州的葛觉平在2016年9月8号苏州大抓捕的为开始的。葛觉平在2016年10月4号被抓，当时他已经身患癌症。我叫倪金芳，我是在2016年。
金芳先生，这个您有哪些需要跟我们的嘉宾沟通吗？3分钟讲话时间。好，我们今天都。
我建议就是希望各个人权组织和国际组织关心中国的法治人权，希望中国早一点实现民主和自由。谢谢。
I urge everyone to cooperate and make China comes to be a constitutional democracy sooner. Thank you.
还有有要发言的吗？有一些问题吗？
问题。
有请。
直接讲问题。
我们今天把握一下3分钟时间哈，不要超过。
3 minutes.
因为我们今天人比较多。
Thank you. My name is Geng He, Chinese Democracy and Human Rights Alliance founder. My question to all of you on the stage, especially CECC, our official here, focusing on the Chinese human rights. And I would like to know if American government could put more pressure on the CCP regime. President Trump is a really great leader, and he made the CCP regime fear because of the sanction financially. And how can we support President Trump and this administration and push further sanction against the CCP in violation of the human rights?
Okay, 谢谢.
Thank you.
谢谢.
So I guess that was directed primarily at me. I think if you look at the first Trump administration, what happened was it moved the Overton window with regards to China. Previously, every president, be Republican or Democrat, had engaged with China, the engagement theory, which James Mann referred to as the China fantasy had prevailed. So the first Trump administration really did change our policy, and it saw China really as a rival, and I would say a systemic rival. And it's important to not just a strategic rival or an economic rival, but one that does want to undo the entire rules-based international order. By and large, President Biden, his administration continued along that trajectory. Yeah, we're now in a situation, I think, where the imposition of tariffs really, I think, squeezed the Chinese economy and put a lot of pressure there. But we also live in a political environment here where time is short, and tariffs do have an impact on the U.S. economy. And I think China also has certain cards that it played, for example, with regards to certain critical minerals and rare earths that are important for our weapon system, magnets and other things too, that they were able to withhold. So I think right now it's a little bit unclear what the direction is, but I would say that really it's your voices that are very important to keep articulating what the true situation is in the People's Republic of China, where the Chinese Communist Party dominates. And I think it's also important that we bear a distinction in mind between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. It's the Chinese people who are first and foremost the victims of the Chinese Communist Party. So anyway, thank you for your voice, Jane, and yeah, please keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Piero. Thank you. Thank you, 秀红。还有哪位要发言？那位先生。
大家好，我是来自中国内地江西的一位主力弟兄。我在此我想说的就是，推动中国的信仰自由是符合美国的利益，也符合中国的利益。我在国内的时候，因为我接待一位美国德州的一位宣教士，她是一位女士。然后呢，因为遭到了那个国保部门的追捕，当时因为国保派2队人马来抓捕他，之后我为这个事就一直受到了那个中共的打压，并且对我家庭的骚扰。
So I will translate for him. I want to say that to push for religious freedom and rule of law of China is of benefit to the U.S. government as well as the Chinese government.
是在美国德州有一位宣教士，一位女士，她来到我们本地的宣教，因为是我接待的，然后由于那个有人举报被国保部门来追捕的话，当时我就把他送上那个长沙的机场飞回，就是安全的离开了。所以他也为我出具了一份证明书。我想说，就是说推动中国的信仰自由是至关重要的。感谢。
I want to share that there had been a missionary from Texas, U.S. that had visited me. 在中国。visited me in Jiangxi province, China, and I want to say and reiterate that pushing for religious freedom in China is of the benefit of the U.S. government. And so she traveled to China, this missionary, and was stopped by the Chinese authority, and I had to escort her to the airport, and this is a proof of her letter written to me.
就是他知道那个。 因为我们教会也跟他。我们教会当时教会的负责人也告诉他，有国保的那个人员，国保公安人员
对不起啊，
到了教会
因为我们是问
来抓捕他
题的时间啊，就说对不起，我们因为现在时间也挺紧张啊，我们是为了问问题，围绕这个主题。
OK.
So it's a question and answer time. So we because the time restraint, 我们就先到这里好不好
OK, thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to our distinguished speakers for the first panel. 我们一起在为他们感谢。So we're waiting for the chairman, Congressman Chris Smith. He's already on the way in a few minutes. But I think before we take a short break, I would ask our both first group of panelists and the second group panelist after maybe you take a 5 minutes break to come up for a photo op after you take your coffee and back, and then with a group picture with Chairman Chris Smith arriving. 就是我们现在先有5分钟的休息时间大家可以去拿一点水，然后希望我们的第一个 panel 和第二个 panel 的讲员呢会5分钟之后赶回来，然后跟大家呢都能在中间里坐在中间这2排聚我们一起照一个集体的照。We actually, in this town in Washington D.C. nothing is certain until the last minute, right? And we, unfortunately, especially because of the tragic flooding in Texas, in my home state now, our dear friend, Senator Ted Cruz, and Congressman August Floger, and Congressman Nathaniel Moran, they all have to send their regret. They couldn't make it for today. And yesterday I also got a phone call from the senior official from the State Department, Patrick Harvey, and he yesterday had a family emergency, really has to drive back home. So he also apologized to all of us. He couldn't make it. But we do have our best, Congressman Chris Smith. He actually drive from New Jersey, and he's on the way in 5 minutes. 我们的史密斯议员呢很快就到了，5分钟就到，所以大家现在先let's have our 5 minutes break. 我们休息5分钟，然后赶紧赶回来，我们一起跟他做一个合影，然后史密斯议员会跟我们讲话之后，我们就开始第2个 panel. So after Congressman Smith take picture and then have his speech, then we'll have the second panelist. Okay, let's take a quick 5 minutes break. Okay, 5分钟大家准时回来。好，谢谢。对啊，现在不能，对，因为时间确实是吧？ 不是，那在后边看不见了，怎么看得见了？
谁呀？
哦，你说这样照一下是吧？
现在是这样吧？你看他这个牌子是在这儿的。
OK。啊？
那个太高，这样牌子一拿，后边站一坐，然后3层，要不然的话根本顾不上。你现在你试试。那个原来他们讲话人的那个名字
你说这个就放在这儿是吧？
你现在这样放，看见没有？他坐着，然后呢，你再。
Okay. No, I think maybe it's better. Let's just stand in the front, and then那我们就其他的也都聚过来，对。OK。所有
人，我们有个合影，请往前靠，尽量往前靠。合影的，尽量往前靠。中间来。
If you would like to get your photo taken, please come up. Come up here.
Come together.
The Commissioner Ferguson from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and Mr. Tony Perkins from FRC, and Dr. Sophia Richardson from China Human Rights Defenders, and Zubira from the Uyghur Human Rights Project, and Francis Hui from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. Please come up and take a seat, and we can have welcome Congressman and Chairman Smith. 好，我们就照相结束了，不要耽误史密斯议员来讲话。
我们进入第二个议题。
Yeah， 我们照相结束了，So welcome Congressman Smith. Please, our first panelist, Tony, and Commissioner Ferguson. Yeah. Zubair, you're already there. Yeah. So you can sit here.
Speaking, or what am I doing?
You
want me to give a
have your
speech, or you
speech.
want me to just-
Yeah, you give a speech. You give a speech, and if you, so Mary is always worried about you, so not staying long, but if you want to stay a few minutes, some questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Anita
thank you.
is our new staff. Thank you for your cooperation. Congressman and Chairman Chris Smith has been a true friend to the Chinese people, 是真正的中国人民的老朋友. He has conducted, I think, over 60 hearings, 170 hearings on China alone. 他自己在国会里边40年光为中国的自由人权主持的听证会就有170多场 170 hearings. And I think a number of laws and bills were passed. And even this year, 2025, I asked the AI how many bills Chris Smith has been sponsoring, and 5 were listed. This past 5 months, he has sponsored 5 bills on China-related, including the rescinding the Most Favored Nation Act. Yeah. So we always are very grateful. The Chinese people are grateful when a real new free China comes, there will be a statue at Tiananmen Square for you. And we thank you very much. Let's welcome Congressman and our great hero for freedom. 我们一起来热烈的欢迎史密斯议员。
Thank you so very much. You know, as you all know, Bob escaped after Tiananmen Square, Bob Fu, Pastor Fu. And ever since, he has been a mentor, a leader, an inspiration. Many of our hearings that we've had in my subcommittee on human rights, on the China Commission, and on the Lantos Commission were inspired by Bob Fu, who never stopped. I mean, when Chen Guangzhen was going through his unbelievable travails and was standing up to a communist dictatorship, and his wonderful wife, who's equally brave, Bob arranged it so that we actually talked to Chen, Mr. Chen, in his hospital room, surrounded by Chinese Communist Party apparatchiks, and that's when he said, I want to come to the United States. It was above the fold in practically every newspaper, including the Wall Street Journal. But who engineered that? Bob Fu. So, Bob, thank you. You have been a leader, unparalleled in what you've been able to do. And when it comes to the religious freedom issue and the synodization that Xi Jinping is imposing upon the country, trying to make everything comport to his Marxist principles, it is Bob, again, who has been leading the way for all of us. So thank you, Bob, and thank you to China Aid. You are just extraordinary. You know, this is a room full of people who know the issue better than just about anybody else. You've lived it. You've suffered through it, like with Chen Guangzhen and so many others that are here. So I want to just say, you know, I'm talking to the choir, talking to people who have tasted the lash of Xi Jinping and all of his predecessors. So what could be added to that? I'll just add a couple of comments and then join you on the panel. Today is a solemn and a somber day, as we as members of Congress and China human rights advocates, Anna Wong, thank you for your work as well, mark the 10th anniversary of China's 709 crackdown. As we all know, on July 9th, 2015, the Chinese Communist Party launched an unprecedented nationwide campaign targeting human rights lawyers and rights defenders. Across 23 provinces, more than 300 lawyers, legal assistants, and activists were detained on fabricated charges. Many were forcibly disappeared for months, subjected to torture and coerced into televised confessions. At least 10 were later sentenced to lengthy prison sentence. And of course, this was all aimed not just at them, but the ordinary Chinese person who had a grief with their government, was trying to assert their rights that are universally recognized. The crackdown was also Xi Jinping's laying down a marker. Just as Jiang Zemin revived the Maoist practice of struggle against a targeted class, by targeting the Falun Gong, Xi would target human rights lawyers, many of whom, incidentally, were Christians. 10 years on, the Chinese Communist assault on the legal profession continues and shows absolutely no signs of abatement. Lawyers who challenge official abuse or defend the poor and persecuted are punished, disbarred, or jailed. The regime has transformed the legal system into an extension of the party's apparatus, compelling lawyers to demonstrate fealty to the CCP and abandon cases deemed politically sensitive. This is the weaponization of law, turning instruments of justice into tools of repression. Forced disappearances, the pervasive use of torture, denial of due process, and absence of defense counsel. These practices violate China's international obligations and contradict its own domestic legal standards. And so we gather today to honor the courage, the tenacity, and the innate goodness of those who stood firm and continue to stand firm in the face of this egregious repression. Among them, of course, is Gao Zhejiang, a brilliant and courageous Christian human rights lawyer who has spent most of the past 2 decades either imprisoned, tortured, or forcibly disappeared for defending marginalized and exposing systemic abuse. As I said during a hearing just last year, Gao is one of China's finest legal minds. His wife, Geng He, who is here today and is speaking, has tirelessly traveled the world to tell his story. She has testified numerous times, as has their daughter, before congressional committees, including many that I have chaired. The 709 crackdown, I say to all of you, was not just an assault on lawyers, it was an attack on every single Chinese individual. The Chinese Communist Party is in a race to the bottom, exceeding even the horrific misdeeds of North Korea on the human rights scale, and they're doing it in every category of human rights abuse. For example, each and every year under General Secretary Xi Jinping, tens of thousands of young women and men, average age 28, are murdered in cold blood to steal their internal organs for profit or to be transplanted into Communist Party members and leaders. These crimes against humanity are unimaginably cruel and painful. Between 2 and 6 internal organs per victim are extracted. It is murder masquerading as medicine. Ethnic groups targeted include the Uyghurs, who suffer from Xi Jinping's ongoing genocide. And you know, there's a market for organs in the Middle East, and the Uyghurs, since they're Muslim, provide a ready-made way of transporting and transferring these organs, which are stolen, and while they're being stolen, the victim is killed, into the Middle East for huge profits by the Chinese Communist Party. In like fashion, the Falun Gong, whose peaceful meditation and exercise practices and exceptional good health make their organs highly desirable. This is right out of Joseph Mengele's Nazi Germany, using medicine in such a horrific way. And yet it is going on right now, right in front of our eyes, and so many people just look askance and won't do a thing to stop it. Over the years, I have chaired several hearings, one going back to the 1990s, when it was a small effort. They would kill prisoners, and Harry Wu was the one who made us aware of that, and take their organs, but it has now morphed and evolved into a huge industrialized human rights abuse. I have many hearings, we've had several, we've heard from one doctor who actually did them, and I remember when he told us, he said one of his patients, victims, all of a sudden started moving. He had not anesthetized that person enough as they're extracting their organs. Again, right out of Nazi Germany. On March 27th of last 2 years ago, we passed the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act 413-2. It It's my bill. Tom Cotton has introduced it on the Senate side. And 2 months ago, on May 7th, just 2 months ago, again, H.R. 1503, that's the new number for it, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, passed the House 406-1. And yet we can't get it out of the Senate. So I'm appealing to you today to talk to the senators and ask them to bring this bill forward. It has very serious sanctions to those who are part of the supply chain at including those who knowingly procure such organs, up to 20 years in prison. We also would sanction Chinese Communist Party officials who are part of this egregious process. It's got to pass. You know, anybody who ever spends any time in a hospital, next time you're in, if you're ever in the ICU, hopefully you're not, just remember you're being helped. Those nurses are acting in a benign and life-saving way. In Chinese Communist Parties, hospitals, they're taking your organs for export or to be used by Chinese cadres who need a new liver or something along those lines. If Xi Jinping himself needs a new liver, he'll turn to somebody from the Falun Gong practitioners in order to get their organs. I mean, I find that so outrageous. And we need to get that bill passed by the Senate, and we need to do it now. 406-1. Are you kidding me? And we can't get it out of the Senate? That really, really angers me because we've tried for years to get this out, and now it's time. Meanwhile, as you all know, the Chinese Communist Party has also turned to collective punishment. We know they do it. They punish everybody when somebody is arrested or when somebody goes to jail. The entire family. Chen Guangzhen faced that with his kids, and Gao Zhixiang as well. You know, how they harass, send secret police with their kids as they're going to school, and worse. So and then, of course, with transnational repression, we know they try to make life miserable once these great individuals, these heroes, make their way into a free country like the United States. You know, from the very beginnings of this campaign, you know of Crackdown on lawyers. The Congressional Executive Commission on China, and Piero Tazzi is here. Piero's our chief of staff. He's been doing an amazing job as a leader there. Scott Flipsy as well, and others, but I want to thank them for their leadership. But we've been on this right from the start, raising it over and over. As a matter of fact, our staff did a great study 5 years after it started. We have another report coming out very, very shortly. Congress has responded repeatedly. As you know, we've passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, and Uyghur Forced Labor Act, among many other initiatives. All of them make some difference. They have not made the difference yet. So we've got to continue striving in order to free. You know, when China is free, they will be a tremendous trading partner. They will be a tremendous ally. And when that happens, the people on this stage, Chen and so many others, they'll be the heroes that are remembered. They're the reason why it would have matriculated from a gross dictatorship to a democracy. Let me also remind everyone that I have, and Bob mentioned it, a bill that would reimpose human rights conditionality to most favored nation status, or PNTR as it's now called. Bill Clinton shamelessly delinked human rights from trade on May 26, 1994. After great fanfare how he had linked it in his executive order, he had accused George Herbert Walker Bush of coddling dictatorship, and then he coddled like nobody else. And to me, that was outrageous. I was joined by many people on the Democrat side who couldn't believe that he delinked it. And if you want to ever look at it further, we have it all on my website in terms of, I even wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal when Clinton lost China, because that's when they took the measure of our country and said, all we care about is money. We don't care about human rights. It's a subordinate issue, page 5 on the talking points. So I hope we can get our bill passed, move towards passage, relink. Matter of fact, his executive order was outstanding. It had everything covered. And then didn't go anywhere. They ripped it in shreds 1 year later. Again, we're getting ready to introduce a new bill, and I'll finish with this, called the Freedom from Gao Zhejiang Act. The legislation would require the State Department to issue a detailed public report on U.S. efforts to advocate for Gao, including diplomatic actions taken, responses received, sanctions imposed. It would mandate the development of a comprehensive diplomatic strategy for securing the release of political prisoners and ensure that the global Magnitsky sanctions are considered very effectively for Chinese officials responsible for Gao's continued detention and the broader repression of human rights lawyers. Again, this meeting today is very important, very timely, and I can't thank you enough for convening it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Smith, as always. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, I want to recognize a few honorable guests. Professor Bill Sanders, the director of Center for Human Rights from Catholic University of America, where our good friend Tang Wang-Tong has been hosted. And we have actually two guests from Canada, all the way coming to attend our conference. Two heroes. One is Mr. Shifeng. Are you here? Mr. Shifeng, yeah, who was a former local member of Congress in Canada. And we have Pastor Liu Fenggang, who has been a champion for freedom, human rights in China, was imprisoned 4 times. And the last time, actually, one of the times he was imprisoned for simply sending a photo to China Aid showing the Communist Party's bombing of a church in Hangzhou. 3 years imprisonment for that one photo. That's the first time my name was put on any Communist Party's prosecution paper, and said it's providing intelligence, a secret, national secret to overseas organizations. That's this brother. He was tortured enormously. So we're so thankful for you and for the Lord's protection for your survival. And I also want to recognize my staff, Anita Chan, who has been a tremendous translator for this service. She's our director for global mission. Without further ado, because every distinguished panelist, their longer bio is already on the program. And I changed a little bit the order of the speaking because our good friend, Dr. Sophie Richardson, she has a train she needs to take for a family matter. Sorry for other panelists. So I want to invite Sophie to speak first. And then we have Commissioner Ferguson from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and Mr. Tony Perkins from FRC, who has a great champion for family, faith, and freedom. Also, my boss in that sense, because I also serve as a senior fellow at the International Religious Liberty Center under FR Family Research Council. And we have Zubira from the Vigor Human Rights Project, have Francis Hui. We are so honored representing the Hong Kong cause for freedom. I also want to recognize my good friend, actually, from our Uyghur campaign, Rusha Rabas. Okay, Rushan Rabas, yeah. Thank you for coming as a freedom fighter. So again, we have each speaker to have the first, everyone has the 3 minutes open statements, and then I will have quick 2 questions to pose to you to answer. Then hopefully we still have some Q&A time. Dr. Sophie Richardson, the co-director of Chinese Human Rights Defenders, who has been a long-time champion, of course, testified before every committee on China, and former director, Human Rights Watch. Thank you. Please.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you, and I'm hoping I don't have to run away too quickly. It's wonderful to be here with you. I actually wanted to start by thanking particularly Geng He for her remarks. I find that every time I speak publicly, there's a moment from an event I take away with me. And I think today's will be her very simple but profound question, 他在哪儿? It's a heartbreaking thing to imagine. There's so many people in this room who don't know where their husbands or their wives, their kids, their parents are. And I think that should motivate all of us, who live in a world where we get to be with family members to keep fighting for the people who don't enjoy that privilege until that's secure for everyone. So thank you so much for your courageous remarks. I'll be brief. It's been almost 30 years since the Chinese government agreed to uphold, if it hasn't yet ratified, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That document could not be clearer on the topic of religious freedom. People have a right to believe and to worship, or not, as they see fit. It's an individually held right, and yet the Chinese government continues to insist that it's a right that Beijing has to give or to take away or to regulate or to dictate. The Chinese constitution remains nakedly in tension with what international law sets out in trying to restrict religion to particular faiths, to a particular way of worship, to giving the state the right to choose religious texts, leaders of communities, and that has to change. I think we still see in the campaign of sinicization under Xi Jinping a commitment to control and dictate religion, not to live up to what's set out under international human rights law. In preparing for this event this morning, I looked back over a number of CHRD's research reports and indeed through our database, and it's extraordinary how many of the cases of prisoners of conscience and more broadly of human rights defenders we document, instances of the Chinese authorities targeting human rights defenders who work for religious freedom, the extent to which Chinese authorities continue to target particular faith communities, or different faith communities' religious activity and construe it as a threat to national security, and indeed the extent to which the Chinese government continues to prosecute and persecute people as having somehow engaged in abnormal religious activity. And we've detailed people, spending 5, 10, 15 years in prison on charges for having done things that are entirely protected under international human rights law. And I think that shows a very disturbing commitment on the state's part to continue to try to control religious freedom rather than fulfill its obligations under international law. So if we can spend a little bit of time talking about what other steps that we can take to try to fix this problem. But I think Xi Jinping has made it pretty clear that he continues to see religion as a threat to the party's control on power and will continue to try to suppress and silence its adherents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Maureen? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today. I learned so much from the previous panel, and not only from the very, very compelling testimony of those whose husbands remain imprisoned, but also I have to say I'm so honored to be here with Chen Guangqian and his wife Wei Jing. I think one of the most instructive books I've ever read on the suppression of human rights in China, but particularly with today's topic, one of the most instructive books I've ever read is The Barefoot Lawyer, which is just a riveting account of, and this happened before the 709 crackdown, so it was a foreshadowing of that. So China under the Chinese Communist Party has never fulfilled its commitments to religious freedom under international law. And it comes as no surprise that once the government destroyed the country's budding community of independent human rights defenders in 2015, that China would begin to, or ramp up, committing some of the world's worst religious freedom abuses. In 2017, just a couple years later, the Chinese government began its genocide in Xinjiang, imprisoning more than 1 million predominantly Muslim Uyghurs for their ethno-religious identity, subjecting them to political re-education, torture, forced labor, horrific sexual and gender-based violence. In 2018, authorities launched one of the largest crackdowns on underground Christians. The targeting of the Rain Church and Pastor Wang Yi served as a warning to tens of millions of other independent Protestants to fall in line or face persecution. In 2023, the United Nations experts recognized China's shutdown of local Tibetan educational institutions and forced placement of 1 million Tibetan children in boarding schools as part of an effort to forcibly assimilate the Tibetan people culturally, religiously, and linguistically. And I'll add here, one of the most interesting things I found in your book, Guanchen, about your upbringing is that because you were a disabled child, had a disability, you were not allowed to be educated in the government-run schools, which actually saved you from the indoctrination and allowed you to see what others did not see. So we see why the Chinese government is putting these Tibetan children in their government-run boarding schools in order to indoctrinate them. The timing of China's broader policies suppressing freedom of religion cannot be understood separate from its suppression of human rights defenders. Independent lawyers have always been on the front lines of the battle to defend religious freedom. In addition to a universal sense for justice, we know that many of these lawyers were motivated by their Christian faith to help the most vulnerable and fight societal injustices. One example among many, the 76-year-old female human rights lawyer, Li Yuhan, spent years defending underground Christian churches, Falun Gong practitioners, and other human rights lawyers, despite threats against her and her family. Detained in 2017, she served a 6.5-year prison sentence for her work, enduring physical and verbal abuse, medical neglect, and other forms of inhumane and degrading treatment. She remains a source of inspiration to many of us for her strength and resilience. USERF will continue to urge the U.S. government and Congress to prioritize religious freedom in China, including the situation of human rights defenders, those targeted 10 years ago and those brave enough to do this important work today. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony? Yeah, Tony used to also serve as the former chairman of USERF. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Good, just want to make sure everyone's still awake. I want to first say thank you for being here. I want to thank Bob Fu for his courageous leadership, Chris Smith for his dogged determination to bring freedom to the people of the world, and for many of you who are courageous heroes for doing what others failed to do. Speak for those who have no voice. You see, it is courage that is the hinge upon which the door of opportunity turns. And I believe because of those who have courage and are willing to risk personal hardship and even freedom, I believe others will taste of freedom as a result. I'm here this morning. I did serve as chairman of the USERF Commission during the first Trump administration. I'm also a Baptist pastor, and so I speak from a Christian perspective this morning, in particular for those Christians who are being targeted in China. You know, there are no better citizens than Christian citizens, those who seek to love their neighbor, live peaceably, and honor authority. As Jesus taught in Mark chapter 12, verse 17, he said, we're to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. But in China, the Communist Party sees that distinction not as virtuous, but as dangerous, because they don't want the things that belong to China, they want the things that belong to God. And we cannot surrender those things which belong to God to any government. To the CCP, ultimate loyalty belongs to the party, not to God. Any competing allegiance is viewed as a threat to state control. And for millions of faithful Christians in China, this means enduring a growing wave of surveillance, of harassment, imprisonment, and censorship. Their loyalty to Christ has made them a target of a government that brooks no rival. The Family Research Council recently did a report, Chinese Families and the Impact of Religious Persecution. And it pulls back the curtain on what life is like for believers. Many of you have experienced this in this room. In interviews, nearly every participant shared a moment when their faith or their family's decision to keep the faith was shaken by persecution. They recount scenes of being threatened at work, interrogated at school, or watched in their homes. And one question lingers in the hearts of many is, why me? But make no mistake, the goal of persecuting some is to intimidate all. China's government believes that fear can silence the gospel. But I have news for them. It will not. But that won't keep them from trying. That's why in May of this year, the regime moved to formally outlaw all missionary activity. It is now illegal to preach, to share your faith, or to establish a religious organization without the Communist Party's approval. Evangelism itself has been criminalized. And what makes this all the more tragic is that Christians in China don't seek to overthrow the government. They seek to serve their neighbor, care for the vulnerable, and live upright lives. But the CCP sees the gospel as a competing narrative, and their repression proves it. I was just on the way over here this morning, I saw a headline that Beijing signals that a summit with President Trump must include concessions on Taiwan. Well, I would say the concessions need to be that China must ensure that religious freedom is a part of every conversation we have with them about trade.
Amen. Yes.
America cannot be silent. Every diplomatic negotiation, every international forum, we must engage China on its religious persecution. If we ignore the cries of the persecuted, we betray the very values we claim as Americans to uphold. Let us stand with the Chinese people. Let us stand with the church in China, not only with our words, but with our policies and our priorities. Their courage, your courage, should awaken the courage of Americans to take the torch of freedom, traverse the globe with the hope that every man, woman, and child was created by a creator, God, to breathe free and to enjoy the choices that only God can give man. That is to honor him and to choose him. Every human being has that right to make that choice. And America must stand with the Chinese people to have that choice. May God bless you.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Zubir from Uyghur Human Rights Project.
Good morning, everyone. Before, I would like to thank my dear friend, Bob Fu, and Anna Wang from Guangchuan for inviting me to speak. Thank you. Right now, I just would like to speak about the reality. Dr. Sophie, my dear friend, Dr. Sophie Richardson already described the China's intention, the repressive policy, and I just would like to focus on how these repressive policy and intention of Chinese government plays out in reality, real life of Uyghurs. The horrific situation of the Uyghurs in East Turkestan is considered as ongoing atrocity crimes under international law. In 2021, the State Department determined these crimes to be crimes against humanity and an ongoing genocide. There are 48 reasons to place Uyghurs in concentration camps. They are any religious expression, like growing a beard, wearing a headscarf, praying at home, or fasting during the Ramadan. It can be attending a traditional wedding or praying at a at a funeral, and more. In reality, just being Uyghur is enough to be taken away into camps. I think everyone knows that the government has rounded up an estimated 2 to 3 million Uyghurs into mass internment camps since 2016. There are an unknown number of deaths in custody. New reporting confirms that many people are being detained for second or third time. Outside camps, there is 24/7 high-tech surveillance, modern-day slavery in Chinese factories, dislocation, forced sterilization, family separation, and forced assimilation sterilization. The UHRP Uyghur Human Rights Organization, where I work for, produced numerous reports about it. I can show you here, for example, 20 years for learning the Quran. This is the latest or recent report about the religious persecution against female religious leaders. According to reports, 16,000 mosques have been destroyed and thousands of cemeteries bulldozed. People are sentenced to 7 or 10 years in prison just for praying. According to our report, Uyghur Human Rights Research, since 2014, 1,046 imams and religious figures have been detained in camps or in prison for the association with the religious teaching and community leadership. The data reveals that of the 1,046 recorded cases, 428 have been sent to formal prisons, including 304 sentenced to prison terms. Of the cases with sentencing information, 96% have received prison terms of 5 years or more, and 25% were sentenced to 20 years or more, often on unclear charges. Another 202 religious figures have been detained in camps. 18 have died while in detention or in prison. UHRP researchers also detailed evidence that overturns the perception that criminal procedures and the long prison sentence in the Uyghur region have been mainly handed down against men. According to our reports, Uyghur religious women, activities of the Buvi, which is a religious leader among the women, who recite the Quran at religious gatherings, teach religious traditions to children, and sing at shrine festivals are also strictly controlled, and they are forced to undergo training by the authorities. Recent report highlighted the long prison sentence given to numerous women for the crime of learning a few verses of the Quran during their childhood, the basic need to fulfill a fundamental Muslim duty of daily prayer. Researchers also noted the detention of elderly women, the coerced return of Uyghur women from abroad, and the use of intrusive digital surveillance and forced confessions. The same repression, detention of Uyghurs existed before. My family is one of the live witnesses to the atrocities since 1949. Some observers state that atrocities began in 2016. However, that is simply a turning point in the attention of the international community. Atrocities have been conducted for many years. Uyghur Human Rights Project has documented the atrocities since 2004, including my brother Abdurazak Shamsuddin's case. He was arrested in 1998 in connection with the Gulji massacre. It's been 26 years this year. He's still in prison. In April 1998, my nephew was shot dead while he was gathering with his friends during the month of Ramadan for a special prayer. He was only 22 years old at that time. His crime was a student who studied religion in Egypt. In 1998, my 24-year-old cousin, Abdulhalik Abdurashid, was sentenced to death. My sister and the cousins attended the trial. 20 young Uyghurs were sentenced to death in an open trial. and paraded in the back of an open truck through the streets, then shot in the head in front of an assembled crowd. My sister witnessed this cruelty and became speechless. After the killing, Chinese police came to my uncle's house and forced him to pay for the cost of the bullet used to shot my cousin. Some members of the Congress have said that they worried that if we criticize the Chinese Communist Party too much, this will encourage, in quote, anti-Asian hate. We need to be very clear. If we don't impose sanctions and stop China, we are actually encouraging genocide. Religious persecution is a global crisis and requires a global response. Every single person on this panel needs America to take action against religious persecution. If the US government does not take action, who will do it? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zubira. Yeah, let's welcome Franz Hui from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Frances Hui. I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator with the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. We are an NGO that is based in Washington, D.C. and London. We advocate for the release of political prisoners and defend the rule of law and civil liberties in Hong Kong. Just in 2023, I became a wanted fugitive with $1 million bounty placed on my head by the Hong Kong government. Today, I am one of the 19 wanted overseas Hong Kongers that are wanted by the Hong Kong government with $1 million bounty. And that also make me, every day, I remember this, and I remember my friends that are still imprisoned in Hong Kong, 1,900 of them being placed in prisons in Hong Kong for a political motivated charge. I remember this every day, wake up every day thinking this is my privilege to be standing here speaking to you, and I will continue to defend rule of law and religious freedom and civil liberties in Hong Kong in any way I can. I believe my fellow panelists have already discussed synthesizations, what it is about and how it is taking effect in mainland China. I wanted to shift the focus to look at Hong Kong and tell you a little bit more about the developments in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a little bit different from China in the sense that it was under Beijing's rule in a separate system, and Hong Kong people were able to keep its way of life and civil liberties enshrined by the Basic Law. This allows civil liberties to thrive, and it became a safe haven for many of the activities that are otherwise prohibited in mainland China. This also applies to religious activities and the religious communities in Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Hong Kong as a Catholic, and so I was able to see the change in the religious communities since I was born till today when CCP has taken control of Hong Kong. And it was particularly helpful when I began my research for CFHK on the deterioration of religious freedom in Hong Kong, which we came out with a report early last year. This is called Hostile Takeover. I brought a few copies and I put it outside at the front desk, but you can also check out the report on our website. And throughout my research, I talked to numerous people with knowledge about the situation on the ground in Hong Kong, from clergymen to school teachers. And the conclusion is that religious freedom in Hong Kong is deteriorating. And the warning signs of what's to come include Beijing's synthesizations of religion, the use of religious education for indoctrination, the intimidation of clergy, self-censorship across the board, and direct attack on religion and faithful. For example, Catholic clergymen from Hong Kong, they were briefed about synthesization, literally provided with seminars on synthesization by Chinese religious leaders that have been co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party. all Hong Kong schools, including faith-based schools that are run privately, are legally required to provide national security education, which teaches socialist and patriotic values. And even though the Sino-Vatican secret deal does not currently extend to Hong Kong, there are multiple instances where Beijing has sought to influence Hong Kong's diocese. And I mentioned about the political prisoners that are still languishing in jail right now. We have a little bit over 1,900 political prisoners in Hong Kong since 2019. And many of them are religious prisoners of conscience, including some of the high-profile activists like Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong and many others. Although they were not imprisoned for their religion, they were imprisoned for their activism that were motivated by their faith. In most recent instance, the Hong Kong government proposed amendments to prison rules, and one of the amendments is to allow the department director to ban people, including certain clergy members, from visiting the prison if the prison doesn't meet the purposes, which includes safeguarding national security. And immediately that made me think clergymen like Cardinal Zen, who had publicly criticized the government or publicly supported pro-democracy values, would be banned from visiting prisoners. But more so, if this provision passed the LegCo, it could be abused to ban all clergymen or any religious practitioner to visit the prison at all. And I like to say that when I talk about CCP as an atheist regime, the reason why they wanted to continue to keep religion and religious activities alive, it's only because they wanted to leverage the religious influence in the region to control the population of faithfuls. And a very good example of that is in 2023, Muslim leaders in Hong Kong, they were arranged with a trip to China, to Xinjiang, and they accepted state media interview, basically dismissing what's happening in Xinjiang with Uyghur Muslims. And they were saying that people in Xinjiang are living happily, prosperous way of living, and there's no such thing with re-educations on Uyghur people. And we see our Muslim friends just living happily in Xinjiang, and we know for a fact that that's not true. And yet they were being arranged to accept state media interviews to dismiss this type of atrocities happening in China. And there are also the Muslim communities in Hong Kong have continuously rallied behind China's development scheme in Hong Kong. So these are just a few examples to show that although religious persecution in Hong Kong has not been as serious as it is in mainland China, religious freedom is deteriorating in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is the next target of Xi Jinping's Sinicization. And I think the US must work to defend religious freedom in Hong Kong for that very reason, and to continue to raise awareness on the situation and to raise the profiles of the religious prisoners of conscience that are still languishing in jail in Hong Kong and in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Yeah. I think without exaggeration, we all conclude, I think the religious persecution, the level of that in China, East Turkestan, of course, Tibet, now Hong Kong has reached to the worst level, right? In maybe 40 years since the Cultural Revolution time. I mean, the past 3 weeks alone, we have seen like 15 Chinese house church pastors were sentenced by the court for putting tithing offering box in the church. The Communist Party, for the first time, criminalized tithing and offering. And the longest sentence was given to a female pastor, Pastor Yang Rong-li, for 15 years. She was sentenced. And along with her husband, 9 years, and others, 3 years, 4 years, 15 pastors. And this morning, I saw actually this also echo what Congressman Smith just mentioned about this horrific practice of organ harvesting. And this morning, you see, if you read some Chinese news, you saw some netizens posted a new sign along with the medical check center in Taiyuan City, the capital city of Shanxi province. A new sign was put on called the Shanxi Provincial Center for Organ Acquisition and Allocation Services. What on the earth a country would put a kind of right on the other side of the medical check center for everybody to check medically with your record, and then the other side, it has this sign called the Shanxi Provincial Center for Organ Acquisition and Allocation Services. And also, just this morning, the British Daily Telegram reported that the Chinese government has decided by 2030 they will increase 6 more organ transplant centers in Xinjiang region alone. So that will make Xinjiang with 9 organ transplant center with only 26 million people, with only 0.4% of the people signed for organ donation. And in Urumqi alone, they will have 4 such centers. Everybody noticed in the Urumqi International Airport, they even had an organ transplant called the speed lane for fast organ transportation. So this raised the issue, I think, to the panelists. I think I will just maybe just combine the 2 questions into one, but still 2 questions. And if you guys can answer in your capacity as a lawmaker, policymaker, advocates, and the NGO leaders. Number one, practically, I mean, of course, Congressman Smith has been sponsoring these bills. If President Trump or other leaders of the free world are in our room, what more could they, could we advise them to do that they haven't done to help protect the basic religious freedom and human rights in China? Number 2 question is a little bit sensitive, but I still want to pose it. That is about the Vatican, because we all know, even after Pope Francis established this secret somehow deal with the Communist Party, have the final nomination authority for all the bishops and other clergymen. Still 10 bishops are still being missing, kidnapped, and some are missing for 27 years. What kind of, according to your knowledge, what kind of effect and what you would advise the new Pope to do if you are having an ear from the new Pope, since he's the first American Pope? And anyone, you want to?
Taking the second question first, repeatedly I asked the Vatican, I met with the Secretary of State Parolin and others, Gallagher, who is like number 2, and encouraged them not to enter into an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party to allow the Chinese Communist Party to pick the bishops, provided it got the ratification by the Vatican itself. I said, this is an atheistic government that hates religion. If it can't co-opt it, it will crush it. In 1994, I'll never forget it, met with a Bishop Gao of Baoding province, Bishop Xu, S-U. He was an amazing man who spent decades in prison as part of the Catholic underground church. He celebrated Mass for our small delegation, He had no malice towards the Chinese Communist Party. He said he prayed for them, which I found astonishing. As I mentioned at the Catholic University of America gathering the other day, I get a bad editorial that I'm fit to be tied in my newspapers. This man was tortured, mistreated. He was out very briefly, and then he was rearrested and has been missing ever since. I had a hearing a few years ago in which we asked Xi Jinping, we sent letters, but we had a whole hearing. Where's Bishop Su of Baoding province? What did you do to him? Emblematic of all the other missing clergymen, faith leaders in China. It was a terrible mistake. We held several hearings, and Tony remembers this. We had people from the commission. We had Tom Farr, who used to be with the commission, testified with brilliance about why this was a very bad agreement and needs to be abrogated by the Vatican. I hope our new Pope will hear that, find some way to get out from this horrible situation. There are many believers who do not want to align with the Chinese Communist Party or pledge any kind of allegiance to an atheistic, God-hating regime. Solzhenitsyn got it right in his Gulag Archipelago, the great Russian leader, human rights activist. And he said, you think communism is atheistic? No, it's militantly atheistic. They hate God. It's not a matter of just saying, we don't agree. They hate God. And everything they do in China today reflects that. On the organ harvesting, we need to pass this bill now. And the reason why is that it is getting worse, as Bob Fu just indicated. They're making billions of dollars. And again, they have whole wings of hospitals dedicated to regenerative medicine, whereby a victim will be brought in and say you're a Chinese Communist Party leader and you need some kind of transplant. You're getting it from the hated groups that are being so horribly victimized in China. That does include Christians, it includes Tibetan Buddhists, but it primarily includes Falun Gong practitioners and the Uyghurs. Like I said before, what an atrocity that the Middle East, where Ramadan does lead to some people needing more organs than they might because of dysfunction when you go through long fasts. So there is a market that is growing. I'm not sure how big it is, but where you want an organ, you want it to be a Muslim organ, so you turn to the Uyghurs in order to get that, and the Chinese Communist Party steps in. Our bill would criminalize it. Anybody along the supply chain, anybody, including the brokers, if you knowingly go to Shanghai to procure such an organ, you'll be held accountable. So it will send the message, we're not kidding. This atrocity has got to stop. We passed it 2 years ago. I asked Bob Menendez and all these others, bring the bill up, and they would not do it. And now I'm asking again that the Chairman Risch will bring the bill up. And let's get this down to the president. I believe he'll sign it. I mean, what passes 406 to 1? It was a totally bipartisan effort, and it needs to be a bipartisan stand against this egregious human rights practice.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Sophie, you want to jump in? You want to jump in? Because I still want to save your time. Sophia, yeah. You want to be aware of your trend.
Thanks. Just on the topic of what governments can do that hasn't yet been tried, I think there are also things that governments used to do that were perfectly effective and they stopped doing, but that's a separate conversation. I think it's worth understanding that crimes against humanity and genocide, as are playing out in the Uyghur region, are subject to universal jurisdiction. And for people who don't sort of live in this world, this is the idea that certain serious human rights crimes can be investigated and prosecuted in countries even if there is no nexus to those crimes. So meaning that, for example, congratulations to everybody in the Uyghur community who has fought hard to get the highest criminal court in Argentina to agree to take a universal jurisdiction case, which I think is an extraordinary step forward. I think we all probably agree with the idea that people who commit serious human rights crimes should be investigated and prosecuted and held accountable. Let's give that a go. This is still sort of taking root in the US. There's just been one UJ case completed here. But I think this is a fruitful avenue. And governments that are serious about their respect for international human rights law and practice, I think, should be pursuing this. On the question, Bob, about the Vatican, I mean, there are lots of recommendations to make to the heads of faiths and to the heads of governments. I think the very logical one for the new Pope, who seems to be comfortable making certain kinds of calls publicly, I see no downside to his calling for the release of all of the Catholic leaders, bishops, faithful communities inside China who have been persecuted by the government, indeed to call for the releases of anybody who's been wrongfully detained on the basis of their religious activity. Those seem like entirely consistent ideas to go along with the heads of what faith communities can do. So I'm not sure who I'm passing to next. I think Maureen.
Sure. I know we're just about out of time here. But very briefly, at USERF, it is our job to advise the US government and not the Vatican. But as an observer, as a Catholic, I think everybody can see that the agreement was a total disaster. And just as a Catholic, I'll say I'm hopeful that the new Pope will view that differently. And I guess we'll have to wait and see. To the first question, I really think we touched upon it earlier when Congressman Smith was speaking, the idea of relinking our trade discussions with the raising of human rights and religious liberty is just essential. And President Trump did say that he would raise the case of Jimmy Lai in his trade discussions with China. And I think, I hope reporters will follow up and ask that question, is he doing that? And our new secretary, Secretary Rubio, was a real leader on these issues in the Senate. Since he's gotten to the State Department, I think there's just been a deluge of, issues around the world, and he has taken on many roles there at the State Department, and there's been this reorganization. So I think, people have been somewhat patient, waiting for the dust to settle, but I think it's really, I'm hopeful that that Secretary Rubio will soon be speaking out more about these issues, because we know he cares about them, but we really need them to be prioritized. We really need the appointee, the ambassador at large for international religious freedom, Mark Walker, to be confirmed. And, the Senate has had a lot on its plate. They got this big, beautiful bill off its plate. I really hope Senator Thune will prioritize the confirmation of the ambassador at large, because I believe he will be a strong voice within the State Department on these issues. Thank you.
I'll take on the first question first, is what we talked about. I think it needs to be a part of every discussion, diplomatic discussion, trade discussion, but I'll bring it to another level. I've been sanctioned by the Chinese government for my advocacy for religious freedom, and I'll tell you what I've done in response to that is that anytime I buy anything, I try to make sure it's not made in China. If we talk about trade policy, we need to talk about personal purchasing power. As Americans who care about freedom, we need to stop buying products that are made in China, often with slave labor. We need to utilize our buying power to communicate a message. So yes, the government has a role, but I think as individuals we have a role as well to play in this. Secondly, on the issue of the Vatican, I'm not sure the Pope wants to hear from a Baptist preacher, but when he does, I'll be happy to talk with him about what he should be advocating for, and I do believe it is for the Chinese Communist Party to set free all of those who are being persecuted for their faith, whether they're Catholic, whether they're Protestant, or whatever they are. The Pope should use his platform to advocate for this fundamental human right that even the United Nations recognizes, that we all have this fundamental freedom of religion. And so I would hope that the Pope would advocate for that.
I think all other panelists already touched upon what to do with the religious persecution and everything. For the Uyghurs cases, to me, the number one thing the US government and other governmental agencies can do is just to implement the policies is already there. For example, just make real difference, make real change to the people on the ground, because the genocide is still ongoing. China didn't stop. Although Chinese government said that some people are released from the concentration camps, they are free, but in reality they are not free at all. Everybody knows that. Real difference can make is just to implement vigorously the laws already passed, for example, in forced labor law, organ harvesting. All sort of laws should be just to implement rigorously and make sure that it doesn't stop. Because, you know, it's very ironic for China how they play all the games. For especially the organ harvesting, they particularly target Muslim Uyghurs and the Falun Gong members, because they see that the organs of those people are very clean, because since they practice religion, they believe in God, they believe in something. At the same time, they target believers who ever practice any kind of religion, especially in the practice Islam, Christianity, Catholic. Those religions are just particularly targeted because those religions are alien to Chinese atheist government. So, you know, we have to question. At the same time, the propaganda to Muslim world is something different. They said, oh, we have religious freedom, we give freedom to practice Muslim religion, and they destroy mosques, shrines in East Turkestan, but at the same time they build mosques and the religious places in different countries to show that the China is allowing religious freedom. So the world should pay attention to that kind of double standard and double practice, and truly understand the evil nature of Chinese government, the skillful nature of destroying believers and all sort of stuff, you know, the humanity as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Francis?
Yeah, I agree with all of my panel's suggestions, and I think one thing that we also need to pay attention to, as you know, the perspective of the U.S., is to make sure we are documenting the situation in China and in Hong Kong, and you know, all the deterioration of religious freedom, the trends, and different instances of how that reflects to us the actual. I believe the U.S. embassies in China and Hong Kong, they're trying their best to do that. But I think there are also things that we cannot really, like there are ways that we can access through official channel. Not only that the U.S. needs to secure a communication channel with the underground church and people, the religious societies in Hong Kong, media is a very important part of it. And with, you know, media outlets, a lot of them being shut down in Hong Kong, and Radio Free Asia recently has also shut down their operation in Hong Kong. It's really difficult. I can sense that, you know, like in a first-person perspective when I was doing research for the report, it's really hard to find someone to talk to me on record, and even if someone who is willing to speak to me on record, they don't want to be quoted with their name. And so we need to make sure that the secure channels continue to sustain so that we are able to know what's happening on the ground, and we're able to form policies accurately to respond to the situation in China. And on the part of what I would tell the Vatican, right now is I think it's important to develop an advisory board with experts that really understand China's religious freedom, like the developments there. And I think actually there is an advisory board for that purpose that was developed by Pope Benedict XVI. I think Cardinal Zen is also a member of that board, but that was not convened by Pope Francis, and I hope that the Vatican could consider reconvening that advisory board that would help the Vatican to really strategically to come up to craft more strategic and effective policies in response to the current situation. And I think at last, I would just say that it's important for religious leaders to continue to advocate for religious freedom and to speak up on those who are being persecuted for practicing religion. It's really important. I think China sees silence as weakness, and what the Vatican is doing right now with the secret deal and the silence on the situation in China and Hong Kong, it's soundingly, I think it's very alarming. And faithfuls in China and Hong Kong, they're experiencing persecutions firsthand, and they wanted to be heard, they wanted to be seen, they wanted to see the religious leaders speaking up for them, to tell them that we know what's happening to you guys, we're trying our best to protect you guys. I think that's very important to faithfuls, and they're really, from my perspective, when I speak to my friends in Hong Kong, I know that a lot of them are hoping that the Vatican could speak up on what's happening in Hong Kong. And yet we haven't seen that. So I think that would be another thing that I would tell the Vatican if the Pope is, standing in front of me. Yeah.
I'd just add one thing very quickly, and that is we need a greater sense of urgency. In 2014, as the umbrella revolution was building steam, we put together a bill, and Scott Flipsy actually wrote it, called the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. And all of the China hands here in Washington, including the chairman of the committees of jurisdiction, said, that'll never happen. Xi Jinping will not go after what is a crown jewel of economic growth for him. They're never going to undo the basic law or the UK Sino treaty. And we said, you don't understand Xi Jinping. It's a matter of when and not if. So we pushed year after year. Finally, when it got so bad and Joshua Wong and others came in, you remember, Francis? And we had a big press conference and we got the bill passed, but it was like 5 years too late. And we're doing that with everything when it comes to human rights vis-a-vis China. This terrible atrocity called forced organ harvesting. We were on this a long time ago. And all the know-it-alls at the State Department, and I have respect for many of them, but they all know it all. They will not allow this to move forward. And we believe last time it was blocked by the Biden administration. My hope is that we could get Trump to agree to it and then do a pulling action to get the legislation down to his desk. He's got that ability, and again, we need to reach out. Urgency. If you're the next victim about to have your organs stripped out of your body, remember, it's equally divided male and female, according to the best evidence that we have. So great number of women, great, and average age 28, 25 to 30 is usually the age range, and then the men. This is an atrocity. We'll look back and say, why didn't we do more? Well, we have a bill that will absolutely criminalize it, bring it to do real reporting, because the State Department does not look at this with the kind of aggressiveness that they need to do to uncover it. They have not been given the mandate. And so we need more urgency. That's why I'm calling on the Senate to pass this bill and to do it yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we are about to be time of, we don't want to starve you guys, but maybe, we should take one question. How about from the audience, since we need to do one. Just a question, okay, not a lecture, not making your points, just ask a question for those experts and policy lawmakers. 所以我们问一个问题只需要简单的问问题，不要演讲。To make it clear in bilingual way. Okay. Who raised the first hand? I think that guy. By the way, I mean, the Pope Francis, I mean, the Vatican was totally silent on what's happening in Hong Kong, the religious persecution in China, and even organ harvesting. The Vatican actually, yeah, worse. It hosts.
One of the bishops, one of the heads of the dicasterate, actually had people come and visit from China as part of, like, somehow they were doing it right. I'm not against donations of organs. We're all for that. You die of natural causes, you die in a car accident, and you get a transplant. That is all on the voluntary side. We're talking about coercive, and we couldn't get them to do anything. Sanchez Serrano sold us out.
Yes, yes.
Hi, hello. This is Park Yang. I'm from the Falun Dafa Information Center. So my question is, in the recent years, we are seeing, regarding religious freedom, we are seeing that the CCP is increasingly utilizing transnational repression, and that is exporting their model of suppression in the United States, and that is eroding our religious freedom right here in the home front, and it's also eroding our, First Amendment rights. So, and this is being funneled through these channels of the security apparatus, leading by the Ministry of Public Security, leading by Ministry of State Security, and all of these United Front organizations. So my question is, how can the United States better safeguard our religious freedom right here against the CCP's, all of these CCP's efforts? And how can we, really stand a very firm stance against what the CCP is doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that very timely question about transnational repression by the CCP. I think there are a few bills right now in...
Very briefly, there are bipartisan bills. I'm heading up one. Others are. Senator Merkley has a bill identical. It's a companion bill. And at the core of it is a strategy that would get the whole of our government, especially like the FBI, more focused on this. It would also sanction those who are a part of it. But right now, it's slipshod. We know what's going on. I'm looking at some of the people, Chen Guangzhen, others, all of them have had efforts aimed at them and many in the diaspora have this happen all the time. We have one person right up here who is wanted for $1 million. Francis, I mean, that's absurd that the long arm of the tyranny of Xi Jinping could reach right into the United States. So we need to push back again very aggressively. This legislation would help.
And other panelists wants to share?
I think I will point to the legal infrastructure that the U.S. have. It's lacking in terms of holding accountability, holding these perpetrators accountable for threatening or committing transnational repression. To this day, we don't have any law, like in the criminal code, there's no law that says, that talks about the definition of transnational repression. If someone commits transnational repression, a lot of times U.S. prosecutions would have to go to other existing law, for example, espionage, or unless someone have done something physical that you could really prosecute them for their threats and physical acts, it's really hard to hold them accountable. So I think that's one thing I would point to. I actually testify as a prosecution witness in a case in Massachusetts, which the defendant was acquitted. And there was so many evidence of him being connected with the Chinese government. He was sending pictures of me, videos of protests that we organized in Massachusetts, and sent it back directly to Chinese officials. And there were records of him working for the police in China. So many record and evidence being shown in the court, yet he was acquitted. And it's so absurd, but at the same time, I wonder if there's a law talking about transnational repression, he would definitely be held accountable. He won't be, walking freely out of the court that day. And it's heartbroken for me, and I think I worry about the safety of the community in Boston when having someone like that to just walk freely out of court. We need to really sew back the gap in our legal system to make sure that these people are held accountable.
Thank you. Any other wants to? Okay. I myself, of course, as you all know, my family had been surrounded for 3 months from September 2020 by a group of CCP thugs and so-called protesters. And every day from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock, showed up, transported from New York, San Francisco, Houston, and as many as over 100 just occupied the whole street in front of my home, and to the point the FBI and our law enforcement had to exile my whole family from West Texas, our home, for 3 months. So the FBI does establish a hotline, specifically ask people to report about the CCP transnational repression activities. 所以联邦调查局呢专门有一个热线，就是要举报那些你看到认为对你有这个是中共对你有这个晋升的，就是跨国的威胁的In fact, we even before Congress, I mean this conference was convened yesterday. Somebody already posted, try to vowed to come here to do threatening and protest. And maybe the guy is already in here, but we already get all the authorities noticed. But without further ado, let's give another round of applause for our distinguished panelists here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Congressman Smith, especially for driving from all the way from New Jersey to come to speak. And we have the restroom is on the back, and so the lunch is already ready. So thank you very much, and also thank you for those who are watching through the live streaming. And you are dismissed. Thank you. God bless you all. Yeah.
I gotta make it 3 o'clock.